Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to tackle a really deep dive into the core doctrine that defines the Chinese People's Liberation Army, the PLA. We're focusing on understanding that political military foundation, the one summed up by that key phrase, the party commands the gun. Hmm. We're drawing on some fascinating recent analyses that came out around the PLA's 95th anniversary. And look, if you want a quick way to get a handle on the mechanics of one of the world's major powers, this is, well, pretty essential stuff. We're moving past the hardware, the tanks and planes, and really diving into the political structure. Because interestingly, the sources claim this system actually solved a political paradox that's troubled civilizations for, millennia. So the big question we're unpacking today is how states control power. How do you build a military that's strong enough to defend the nation, really effective outside, without that same military becoming a threat to the state itself or the ruling regime?
And what's really interesting here is that the analysis frames this not just as a Chinese issue, but as something universal. I mean, from ancient Rome right up to modern nations, military power is central. And this whole relationship between politics and the military, it's always kind of come down to three persistent, interlocking questions that, well, every state has to figure out.
Okay, right. So let's unpack that ancient challenge, lay out the framework the sources are using here.
Well, first is the problem of control. Whose army is it really? And how does the state make sure it's absolutely loyal to the political system? Second is what the analysis calls the competence paradox. How do you keep the military effective at fighting when it's strictly under civilian or political control? Because historically, tight political control often makes the military weaker. That's the paradox you've got to solve.
Oh, okay. So if you put politics first, you might weaken your fighting ability. But if you prioritize capability, you risk political stability.
Got it. What's the third question then? The third is all about civilian-soldier relations. How is the relationship managed between the military, the soldiers, and the regular population? Does the military protect people or does it end up preying on them? When these three things aren't properly balanced, the political chaos that follows can really threaten the state itself.
Right. And it sounds like Chinese history gives us a long, kind of painful case study in failure before this modern solution emerged.
Mm-hmm.
So let's look back. How did the imperial period try to handle that first question, the control one?
Indeed. Yeah, the best historical attempt to really solve that control problem, according to these anniversary papers, was way back with the Northern Song dynasty, starting around the 10th century.
Their solution was basically radical centralization, wasn't it?
Exactly. The Northern Song, they focused almost totally on control. They brought the army directly under the court's command, and they used this like a complex setup of checks and balances. And the key thing was they split up military authority horizontally to stop any single local military boss from getting powerful enough to, stage a coup or break away.
Yeah.
They deliberately moved commanders and their troops around a lot just to stop them forming those regional power bases.
That sounds pretty effective, actually. And that system did largely prevent internal military coups or big regional breakaways right up until the very late Qing dynasty. We're talking centuries of internal political stability.
It's a huge historical point about successful control, yeah. And here's where that paradox really kicks in. This extreme political focus, this centralization and control, the analysis points out, it actually led to a weak military overall. There's a Chinese phrase for it, wu di bu zhang, which basically means their military capability wasn't really up to scratch. The price for internal safety was external weakness.
And then, the moment the state did need a strong army, like to put down those massive peasant revolts late in the Qing, well, they had to give military power back to local strongmen, guys like Zheng Guofan.
Precisely. That whole centralized system broke down, military power scattered out to the regions, and that path led pretty directly to the warlord era of the Republic. So the Song dynasty's initial success with control, ironically, kind of set the stage for that whole warlord mess that defined the early 20th century.
Okay, so we see centralized control leading to military weakness, and then decentralized power leading to political collapse. Now, let's connect this to that second big historical failure the sources mentioned, that 2,000-year problem of civilian-soldier relations. How did that play out?
Well, the problem of the army becoming sort of detached from the people, it has incredibly deep roots in China. Originally, way back in the Shang and Zhou dynasties, fighting was just for the nobles, the aristocracy. Commoners, they just focused on farming.
But then you had states like Qin and Han, and they brought in universal conscription, didn't they? Trying to build a national army connected to the people.
They did try, yeah. But the sheer size, the administrative burden of the Chinese state, it just crushed that system. Conscription became this extreme, unsustainable hardship for the peasants. I mean, imagine marching hundreds, thousands of miles, year after year, right when you needed to be planting or harvesting. It just caused economic and social pain, didn't really build national unity.
Wow. That must have created huge resentment towards the military, even if they were technically citizens drawn from the population.
Oh, absolutely. And the failure of that universal draft led slowly to the rise of professional soldiers. But these were often, poorly paid mercenaries, maybe troops from tribal groups or other marginalized people. This professional separation created deep tension, and when things got unstable, it led to outright hostility between the soldiers and the people. The sources say this basic tension was there for over 2,000 years, making every national crisis even worse. It's pretty wild to think about, that disconnect lasting for so long.
So fast forward to the early 20th century, and the whole political military system is just a complete wreck. The warlords show the failure of political control in the professional armies. They show the failure of civil-military relations.
Totally dysfunctional. Sun Yat-sen, he saw this was an existential threat. He tried to move towards a party-led army, getting ideas from the Soviets, But his efforts didn't really work out, partly because of the limits of his own party, the Kuomintang, and also just that deep-seated warlord thinking still present even within his own group. The old ways were just too strong.
And the early communist leaders, they weren't much clearer at first, right? The
Yeah.
sources say they didn't really grasp the need for their own independent armed force. They just saw the military as a tool, something any class could potentially use.
Yeah, that confusion really bit them in 1927. After the revolution failed and the Nanchang Uprising happened, the communist forces that survived were just shattered down to less than 1,000 troops. They were facing ideological chaos, soldiers deserting left and right, zero discipline. It was a genuine crisis moment. The whole military project was about to collapse.
Okay, but this is where it gets really critical, because this absolute failure becomes the crucible, the thing that forged the PLA's core structure,
Yeah.
the San Juan reorganization.
Exactly. It was Mao Zedong who stepped in to sort out these broken forces. He stabilized things first by kicking out the unreliable folks and shrinking the force down to just one regiment. But the really epoch-making event, as the sources call it, the real game changer, was the organizational overhaul that came next.
Wait, so he didn't just put leaders at the top. He pushed the political structure way down to the company level. Why was that level of detail? Why was that such a big deal?
Because it solved that control question once and for all. He set up party structures throughout the army. Party branches were put right at the company level, then committees at battalion and regiment. And crucially, political representatives were assigned above the company level. This made sure that political command, the party structure, was baked into the smallest fighting unit. Control became absolute, pervasive.
Okay, but that sounds a bit like the Northern Song solution again. Tight political control. How did they avoid the competence paradox this time around? How did they make sure this intense focus on politics didn't just lead to military weakness like before?
Good question. They solved it by, at the same time, bringing in democratic principles within those units. Things like equality between officers and soldiers, setting up soldier committees. This whole reorganization became the foundation for what the sources call the People's Own Army.
And that organizational foundation that was then cemented at the Gachin Congress in 1929, that's where they laid out the definitive answers to those three big universal questions we started with.
Yes, exactly. For control, the answer was absolute party leadership, making sure the army served the party and, the peasant and worker masses. That famous line from 38 came out of this thinking. The party commands the gun, and the gun must never be allowed to command the party. This, they argue, finally ended that 2,000-year failure of political control in China.
But let's stick with the competence paradox. How exactly did they link political structure to actually being good at fighting?
They did it by using political and ideological work, plus this concept of democratic centralism as the main drivers for morale and, competence. The sources explain that democratic centralism meant you could have open debate and criticism inside the unit. That's the democracy bit. But that led to unified, unquestioning carrying out of the party's line. That's the centralism bit. The system was meant to build internal accountability and a collective sense of ownership over the mission.
So the structure itself, having that party branch right there in the company, it helped open up communication, which then boosted morale.
Precisely. Mao himself noted that the army's incredible ability to survive hardship and constant fighting, it was down to that party branch structure and the internal democracy. There's that famous story about how a soldier who was maybe cowardly in the enemy army became brave in the Red Army. Why? Because of the influence of democracy, political belief, and that sort of accountability within his unit. They genuinely believed that ideology and organizational loyalty were the real, lasting sources of combat power, more important than just pure military professionalism.
And finally, how did they tackle that massive 2,000-year-old problem of civilian-soldier relations?
That was handled by making sure the army was truly the people's own troops. And they did that through really strict political discipline. They brought in the three main rules of discipline, which aimed to create this tight fish and water relationship with the people. The most famous rule is probably not taking a single needle or thread from the masses. This strict discipline, the sources claim, turned the military from something peasants resented into a source of security and comfort. It integrated them deeply into the political fabric.
That's a really powerful foundation they built. But like any engine, this political one needed upkeep, right? How did the party adapt this unique doctrine under later leaders, like Deng Xiaoping and now Xi Jinping?
The doctrine definitely evolved. The main shift was from focusing on internal revolution to national defense and modernization. Deng Xiaoping, after 1981, he introduced the need for modernization and regularization. While always keeping party control absolute, Deng emphasized the army's role as the firm cornerstone of the state, the guardian of socialist construction. He started that drive towards professionalization, but always with the understanding that the mission was fundamentally political.
And more recently, Xi Jinping's strong army thought. That seems to ramp up the political control even more, doesn't it?
It certainly does. Xi Jinping's focus is on achieving the China dream and the related strong army dream, aiming to build a world-class military. And this is defined by three pillars that echo that founding doctrine directly. First, that it commands the party meaning absolute loyalty. Second, that it's capable of fighting and winning effectiveness. And third, that it possesses excellent conduct, good civilian relations.
It's a clear continuation. The sources really emphasize that every major military reform, even the huge structural changes under Xi, has been framed first and foremost as a political move. Things like reducing corruption, increasing transparency, and crucially, making sure every command level reports directly to the Central Military Commission, which Xi heads.
Right, and that emphasis on political consolidation is key to understanding why the PLA plays such a unique role in civilian life today. Things like disaster relief, flood response, pandemic duties. When the PLA shows up, the sources suggest people see them as a stable authority, kind of showing that old connection between the military and civilians, even now.
Okay, now we need to shift to the present day. The sources talk about goals like national reunification and the Great Rejuvenation, needing that unified party command. But warfare itself is changing so drastically. We're not just talking about the kind of traditional infantry battles they fought back in the founding years.
Absolutely not. The big challenge today is coordinating the political, military, and informational struggles, what the sources refer to as the Great Struggle. They explicitly draw lessons from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, pointing out that winning in modern, complex, multi-domain warfare demands coordination across loads of sectors, not just the traditional military side.
Right, we're talking cyber warfare, information ops, psychological warfare stuff that moves incredibly fast, often in a decentralized way. How does a system built on central control, laid down back in 1929, handle that kind of conflict?
Well, the sources credit the party's organizational strength, that very structure developed at San Juan and Gutian, with solving what they see as the highest level of political military coordination needed for these new kinds of struggles.
But how does having a strong organization actually help with, say, integrating a new cyber command unit effectively? How does that work in practice?
The idea is that it ensures everyone is pulling in the same direction, a unified purpose. If success in modern conflict depends on coordinating military moves with diplomacy, economic actions, managing public opinion, and it often does, then the state needs an organizational setup that can order and execute that cross-sector coordination almost instantly. The party structure, because it's deeply embedded in every sector, civilian and military, is designed precisely to mobilize and unify thought and action very quickly. They see this ability to unify thought as the crucial thing that stops things from falling apart in a crisis.
Okay. The sources also mention three specific things needed for success in this new era. What are they?
Right. First is military soul, or Junhun. This basically means making sure every single person involved, right down to the logistics officer or the cook, truly understands the political and national importance of their job, the why behind the fight. Second is confidence, or Xinsheng. This is about having a deep internal belief in the rightness of the cause. They believe this generates organizational strength and resilience, which is super important in information warfare where morale is under constant attack.
And the third element is that organizational structure we've been talking about all along. It keeps coming back to that initial political solution.
It really does. The core belief hasn't changed. Political goals and absolute organizational loyalty are seen as the main drivers of lasting combat effectiveness. The system isn't just designed to win battles, it's designed to prevent that fragmentation of purpose that plagued Chinese armies throughout history.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. We've really explored how a state tries to make sure its military is both completely loyal and incredibly effective, that paradox that so many empires struggled with. And the solution, according to these sources, wasn't just about military skill, but about replacing that focus with deep political ideology and this pervasive integration between the military and civilians.
Yeah, the key takeaway for you, the listener, is pretty clear. The People's Liberation Army is fundamentally built to be an armed political organization. And that party command structure, the source material views it as the highest level solution to that age-old political military dilemma, historical achievement in their eyes. However, and this is the final thought, that achievement raises a really critical question for the future. Can this unique model, built on extreme political centralization, rigid coordination, unified thought, can it adapt effectively to the sheer speed and decentralized nature of future conflicts, especially conflicts fought mainly in the digital and information spaces? It's a structure designed for top-down mobilization, but future warfare might need instant distributed decision-making. That tension between control and agility, that's definitely something worth mulling over.